EarthBound was released for the Super NES in Japan in August of 1994. Almost a year later, the game was released in North America in June of 1995. The game was developed by Nintendo, along with companies Ape Incorporated and HAL Laboratory, under the guidance of director Shigesato Itoi. EarthBound is a turn-based RPG in the vein of Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy, except it's one of the first to ditch the fantasy setting for instead telling the story of kids on a journey through what seems to be an adaptation of modern-day America. The game is actually the second game in the Mother series, which consists of 3 separate titles. Mother, or later localized under the name EarthBound Beginnings, is the first game in the series, released in 1989 for the Famicom. Then following EarthBound is the Game Boy Advance title Mother 3, which was released in April of 2006. Similar to many RPG series, each game is a standalone entry, focusing on a different group of characters, although there are similar elements that appear through each of the 3 games. EarthBound and its predecessor were both released on the North American Wii U eShop as virtual console games in 2013 and 2015 respectively. EarthBound also came to the Nintendo 3DS in 2016. As of today, EarthBound is the only game in the series to get a full retail release in North America. The Mother series has always been somewhat niche. Though not massively popular, the games built and maintain a strong cult following to this day. Fans of the genre often tout EarthBound as one of the best RPGs of all time, and one of the must-play games on the Super Nintendo. Like many people in my generation, one of the first games I played was Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo 64. Ness, EarthBound's protagonist, was one of the final unlockable characters in the original Smash Bros. This was my introduction to the character, and to the Mother series as a whole. I started playing video games post-Super Nintendo, so I had no idea who this Ness character was. Years went by and I still had no way to experience EarthBound, unless I wanted to try to get my hands on a SNES and a copy of the game. Years later, following the game's release on Wii U Virtual Console, I jumped at the opportunity to download and play the game. However, until now the game was never able to hold my attention past the first few hours. Recently, I decided to go back to the game and finally complete it, to understand what all the EarthBound fans I saw online were ranting and raving about. I've now completed the game after so many years, and I'm ready to discuss if you should play it too. Now I should warn those watching, in my opinion, EarthBound is a game that's best experienced while going in blind. The quirky and oftentimes random nature of the game makes not knowing what to expect next very entertaining. There are definitely some real WTF moments throughout the game that in my opinion are best taken in unspoiled. That being said, I will try my best not to get too spoilery in this discussion. I'll limit the background footage to early game locations, and though I'll be talking about the game as a whole, I'll try to avoid any plot spoilers, so you can still go into the game fresh after watching this. After finally completing it, I will say that EarthBound is an extremely strong video game. It really does ooze quality in pretty much all aspects. This is especially impressive considering how long ago it was developed. Right away I noticed the beautiful pixel art. It's not the most detailed artwork, but it has a unique charm. To me it really stands up as unique against other sprite work, as I feel like I can pick out EarthBound sprites from a group, since all the pixel art seems to fall into this hand-drawn cartoon style, especially the overworld sprites, with a lot of soft, round edges. For example, look at the squiggly, raised mountain-like structures that are prevalent in several of the game's locations, some complete with little round tufts of grass. This is just one example of how, for the most part, the setting is really soft and cute, making the young child characters seem right at home in this game world. Another interesting aspect of EarthBound is the 8-way directional movement in the overworld. This is different from games like Pokemon or Dragon Quest, where the characters could only go up, right, left, and down. This creates a more free-feeling movement system that seems more open than the blocky and sometimes rigid feel of a 4-way directional tile map. As much as I love the sprite work, this is not the main appeal of the game for me. I love the writing in EarthBound even more than the art. I can't help but draw a comparison to the Paper Mario series, as the game's dialogue is extremely smart, witty, and self-aware. At times, the dialogue goes into ridiculous territory. So if you enjoyed the great, humor-filled writing in the recent Paper Mario: The Origami King, I would recommend EarthBound's writing as being just as good, if not better. One theme I noticed through the characters and dialogue was the dichotomy between kids and adults. In this fictional continent of Eagle Land, many of the adult characters are seen as stupid, dopey, and one-dimensional, as their dialogue is filled with ridiculous quotes that are often quite hilarious. This is juxtaposed with the kid characters, who often have better things to say. It seems in this game that the kids are the ones with the power, and the adults are ridiculed for their trivial and often corrupt world views. In this game, kids are empowered, while adults are cast aside. While playing, I found many parallels to the popular story The Little Prince by Saint-Exupéry. So if you like that story, I'm confident you'll find something to enjoy in EarthBound. This is another thing that's quite remarkable about EarthBound. If you want to, you can certainly examine the rhetoric of it. The writing and story, aside from being very charming, is deep enough to inspire further conversation. I found the game to strike the balance of 4 kids and 4 adults, as Nintendo does so well with many of its games. Similar to many Disney movies or the SpongeBob TV show, there's something worthwhile here for every age group. If you are the type of RPG player that often skips dialogue, then EarthBound might not be the game for you. However, I strongly suggest that you give it a chance. Every character's dialogue, from even the most obscure NPC, is high quality. It feels like none is wasted or filler text. There is always at least a joke or meaningful sentiment in each character's dialogue. I think the developers knew this as well, as many of the story events are only triggered when talking to certain NPCs. This not only encourages the player to talk to more NPCs, but it also makes it a requirement to progress in the story. While the game's exceptional writing helps build a great world, the music and environments play a huge role too. I can confidently say that EarthBound has some of my favorite music tracks in all of video games. My favorite track is from the Saturn Village. It's extremely catchy, fits perfectly with the whimsical locale, and was extra satisfying during gameplay as I finally figured out what a Mr. Saturn was after all these years of seeing that item in Smash Bros. The overall presentation of EarthBound is amazing. The game is extremely random, and the eclectic mix of music tracks and the memorable cutesy art include battle screen backgrounds that can even get more trippy than the music. This all leads to an RPG experience that's pretty unforgettable if you open your eyes to it. Now let's get to the gameplay. I have to say that the actual gameplay in EarthBound is not nearly as unique or memorable as its presentation. Mechanically, the game is a pretty standard turn-based RPG, albeit the game does innovate in quite a creative way through some of its systems. You move from town to town on your journey, collecting party members and solving various problems on your quest to defeat the evil force known as Gygus. Enemies approach you in the overworld, and if you make contact with them, a battle is engaged. One unique element of EarthBound is that it matters from which direction you approach the enemy. If you approach the enemy sprite from behind, you have the chance for a sneak attack, meaning you can get in an extra turn at the start of the battle due to enemies being surprised at your approach. If your characters have high enough stats, you can even instantly defeat weaker enemies, which was a very welcome element in my experience, as it saved me from many useless and time-wasting fights throughout my adventure. On the other hand, if an enemy approaches the player sprite from behind, they will get the same sneak attack on you, giving them an extra turn in the battle. This system adds a fun and unique element to traversing the overworld, adding a little bit more depth when exploring certain areas. It can be exciting, yet very difficult, to sneak past enemies when your health is low or you simply don't feel like fighting. The actual battle system is very similar to something like Dragon Quest. Each party member has a standard melee attack, as well as certain spells or items that they can utilize in battle. These include PSI spells and items that can inflict damage, heal, or give status conditions. Each party member has his or her own specialty in battle, giving combat a similar feel to other party-based RPGs out there. The most unique part of EarthBound's battle system is the feature of the rolling health bars. With this system, each time a party member takes damage, their health value starts ticking down at a moderate speed instead of being applied instantly. Why does this matter? It gives the player an opportunity to heal the character with an item or PSI spell before the ticker rolls down to 0. For example, if Ness is hit with fatal damage, but he's able to get a healing spell off before his health reaches 0 on the UI, he will survive the blow and continue fighting. Though overall the system did not make a huge impact during my adventure, it did save me a handful of times. It was quite fun testing my APM, trying to key through menus as fast as possible to get a healing spell off and save my party members in peril. It actually made the game feel more immersive. I felt that I had a physical role in saving my party members. If I was fast enough with button presses in the real world, it gave them a better chance at survival. This was something I really enjoyed about the game. Saving characters with this method was often difficult and at times impossible, but if I managed to pull it off, it was very rewarding, as trekking back to a hospital to revive a dead party member was not something I ever wanted to do. Now my review has been pretty positive so far, but EarthBound does have its share of frustrating and dated gameplay elements. For example, one of the main annoyances during my time with the game was the limit on inventory space. Each character has a maximum of 14 inventory slots, and there are a ton of items. I would frequently run out of space and have to sell or toss items. And as someone who tends to hoard items in RPGs, this was a bit painful at times. This problem got better as I got more party members, as each of them had their own inventory as well, but it was still an annoyance throughout. Oftentimes I would have to spend 5 to 10 minutes of my time just doing inventory management, selling or tossing or storing away items that I didn't think I needed, just so I was able to pick up more key items as I ventured forward. The game does have a storage system called the Escargot Express. This does help to alleviate the cluttered inventory problem, but it's very slow. In order to store an item, you must call the Express on the phone, many of which are located in towns and other key areas. A short while after calling the Escargot Express, a delivery man arrives to take some of your items back to storage. Seems fair enough, right? Well, here's the kicker. He can only take 3 items at a time. Meaning, if you want to free up more than 3 spaces in your inventory, you must call the Express again, wait for him to come, go through all the dialogue, and then select another 3 items one at a time. This is an extremely slow and at times frustrating process. Though this delivery man system is unique to EarthBound and certainly charming the first few times, it quickly becomes annoying, and personally, I don't think the charm of this system outweighs the annoyance it brings. Staying on the topic of items, there are several shops in the game that sell weapons and items that are useful on your journey. However, when browsing the shops, there is no way to tell what a certain item does unless you buy it and select the help option in your inventory. This makes it so you have to guess what the items do before you buy them. Often, buying an expensive item is like playing the lottery. The items are pretty whimsical in nature, so it's hard to guess the exact purpose of a lot of them. It's actually kind of fun to guess what items do before you buy them, but despite all this, it can be frustrating when you end up wasting money on something you don't need. I also found a few issues that seemed to break the flow of the adventure for me. A pretty minor annoyance was the many photo ops throughout the game. If you haven't played the game, you'll quickly find out what I mean once you try it. This is not a huge problem, as they are relatively quick, but can get annoying, especially if you trigger multiple in quick succession. What I felt was worse was when new characters entered the party. Often they arrived very weak, forcing you to grind to level them up before progressing in the story. Now, I've played games with far worse grinding issues, and I think the later characters require quite a bit less grinding to get them to a usable state, so overall, I don't think this is a huge issue either. Rather, I find the slight amount of grinding just a minor annoyance in the overall scheme of things. It broke the flow of the adventure at times, but it was never enough to truly aggravate me. What was aggravating, however, was the teleport spell. Later in the game, you learn a spell that is essentially fly from Pokemon, letting you fast travel to any town you have previously visited. While being a super useful spell, it was also extremely annoying due to needing a long straightaway path to cast the spell. When casting teleport, the player charges forward like an airplane taking off from the runway. But if anything impedes your path, the spell fails. I can't tell you how many times the corner pixel of a tree or a runaway dog in the overworld caused me to fail the teleport spell. There were even times when I had to go exploring for a long enough straightaway to use the teleport spell, which wasted a considerable amount of time. This is yet another classic EarthBound quirk that is frustrating, yet kind of endearing, and helps make EarthBound the extremely weird adventure that it is. It says something about the quality of the game that most of the grievances I had with it could be classified as minor nitpicks. Speaking of nitpicks, my final gripe with the game had to do with, surprisingly, its performance. I played through the 3DS Virtual Console release and experienced some noticeable frame drops at certain points. Mostly, I would notice some slowdown when there was a lot going on in the overworld. Though it was very seldom and hardly noticeable, I was surprised by this. I am curious if these frame drops are present in all versions of the game, or if this is exclusive to the 3DS version. For the most part, EarthBound holds up very well to this day. Most elements that I feel are outdated, like the inventory limit, could be easily rectified in a remake. If I was in charge of directing a remake, I would keep the game mostly the same. The biggest change I would make would be adding unlimited inventory space. Other than that, I think a remake with updated graphics, new musical arrangements, and some other modernizations would be amazing to see. Please, Nintendo. If you are a fan of classic SNES era RPGs, you have probably played this game already. But if for some reason you have not, I highly recommend it. Also, if you are a fan of the Paper Mario series and love smart, humorous writing and quirky RPG elements, I also feel like you will love this game. The games that I have previously played that I feel are most similar to EarthBound are the older Dragon Quest titles and of course Undertale. If you are a fan of those games, especially Undertale, I also think you will find something to love in EarthBound. If you still have access to a 3DS or Wii U, I think this game is well worth the purchase. Plus, in my opinion, I think it's inevitable that this game will arrive in some form on the Nintendo Switch eventually, so if that happens anytime soon, I don't think there's any excuse not to try out EarthBound.